Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Patrons video today that I'm making for Alan Sun as part of their custom monthly music review. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves a track on the screen from an act named Radiohead off of their OK Computer album. This is titled Let Down. We're going to listen through this track from start to finish and we're going to hear what we think. Let's go. The lyrics as well. Already kind of lost track of the, oh no, we're in 4/4. Very tight mix. Okay, interesting to have that extra bit of space there. It's nice to finish that. It's kind of very satisfying when the loop goes around itself and reiterates back into that intro theme. The jangly guitars with the interesting arpeggios combined with the bass line and the interesting 16th-note grooves with the switch outs with the toms and that chorus part and the breaks are kind of dope. Crushed like a bug in the ground, let down and hanging around. Really kind of interesting double tracking of the vocals on the far sides as well. It makes up for the stereo field imputations that we had there with the guitars earlier on. I mean, those delays are phenomenal. I love the freshness of the tone of them. Interesting, sort of dull thud to the kicks as well. And I assume that those are synth sort of sequences and the sides there that are a nice little addition. What we haven't had before. It's nice to have a bit of sort of diversity or shift at this point. Or sort of fantasy kind of video game-ish. falsetto is very convincing. How they hang over into this final iteration of the chorus. I really love the tone of those synths. They do work quite well with the strum guitar on the left. And then they just kind of like stumble and stop at the end. I don't feel like there's a lot more to say that I wouldn't be saying in the conclusion at this point. It's one of my I don't really like listening to Radiohead that much. I appreciate their music and what's required to make it. They're clearly very knowledgeable, skilled, and talented musicians. It's just that I've never really connected with their stuff before. Purely from an aesthetic value, though, I really enjoy the sounds that are within this, and we're going to discuss that more in the conclusion. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this track from an act named Radiohead titled Let Down. What do I think this track is about? I think it's basically discussing people who have gone through some real kind of shit in their lives, and they're just sort of like struggling, and they're like crushed bugs, and they're squirming and writhing and just trying to sort of like cling to something in order to be able to get through it. And they're hoping that with enough of these downsides, eventually they'll be able to sort of grow wings and kind of fly away from the situation they're in. Basically, it just talks about how people are disappointed, that kind of wish for a better thing. But I don't know if we necessarily get that resolution lyrically in the end. Ultimately, I do think it's a story that I think when people listen to it, they're probably going to be able to relate to. The vocal style, the way that we're kind of, that kind of sounds like we're crying out. We're not really sort of committing to hard consonants or anything like that. It's very legato-ish in the performance of the vocal parts there. I liked some of the falsetto parts. The head and chest voice was good. We're not going for an operatic, virtuosic performance here, but I think nonetheless his style is signature and it's easily identifiable, and I can hear bands later on that have released music after this, you know. I can hear how Radiohead would have influenced them, for sure. I think that we picked some really interesting melodies for the hooks and verses. I liked the sort of like the final part of the track, the outro, where we had the vocals on the right, and they came to the left, and they kind of call and responded with each other, with some doing falsetto and others kind of harkening on, furthering to it. And we iterate upon that sort of phrasing of the chorus near the end as a finale. And I think that while, again, like, I don't listen to a lot of Radiohead, this is one of my favorite ones, primarily because of just how pretty the vocal melodies are and how they harmonize with the rest of the elements within the mix. And I think it was nice also to allow the instruments to have breaks there, to allow the backing to have their time to shine. The track itself at 5 minutes is outside of the 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. So traditionally, you really do need to have diversity within a piece to be able to justify that length, in my opinion, because a lot of other times a lot of listeners are probably going to become disinterested. But luckily in this situation, Radiohead had some really interesting individual parts, like again the chorus, where we had extensions after each line of like 2 bars or something like that. We also had just moments where there was, again, just instrumental parts only without any sort of storytelling, that had some wonderful guitar parts that were nice and lush with the different sort of arpeggiated, not necessarily fingerstyle, but because there was some clean sort of steel string guitar strumming later on the left side there. That was an interesting pairing decision. But it was also just the color of those broken chords there and dispersed between the different guitar takes on either side of the stereo field. We didn't really hesitate to bring those in at the beginning. We were trying to make sure the listener had stuff to sort of feast on, and I enjoyed that. I think that things got janglier later on in those hook sections, and I like the fact that while we didn't overplay, there was a bit of finesse and kind of like momentum to those lines there, given the tempo that we were at. We clearly understand how to play the guitar as an instrument and understand how to layer it on top of the bass guitar, which was nicely segged within that lower section there. It was moving at a pace that was similar to the drums, but it still had good presence and it didn't overplay its hand. It pocketed, and it worked because of that, of exploring the root notes and gradually kind of hitting a safe space. The drums were great. I liked the way that we didn't only just play those kind of 4/4 beats when they came in with speed, Well, not with speed necessarily, but with finesse and solid technique. But we also had some interesting sort of time fill sections there, exploring some 16th notes, working with unusual time signatures that were not the same per section, so a bit of rhythmic or phrasing diversity there. And we had a good sense of dynamic range. We pocketed when we needed to, and we just allowed the guitars and the bass and the synths, when they were in their own kind of field, to have their time. So we didn't try and oversaturate things. The synthesizers that we had later on, little sparkly, those things we had later on, they might have been a guitar effect, and I could be wrong, forgive me if that is the case. But I really appreciate the fact that we had those as a little bit of a flourish to kind of spice things up in the high end there and add a bit of kind of beauty to it and kind of innocence almost, as if Dreaming for Wings was something that we could potentially be purified by. I will also note that the panning decisions of those going out to the sides were really clever as well. It explored the stereo field really neatly. And with the guitars, going back to that, I really enjoyed the reverb and delay tones on those. The way they kind of flickered and kind of followed each other and naturally resonated in certain points was really satisfying to listen to. The theme overall, with those parts considered, with a structure that traditionally sort of like capitulated to the whole verse chorus thing with instrumental parts and maybe an interlude, like outro that iterated upon the first and an instrumental intro. We had a track there where ultimately it sounded like melodically complicated. If you put all the notes together, you have a really kind of fascinating, uncertain chord there, which is not, I don't think is melancholic, but it didn't necessarily commit to like a happy or a sad thing, or like really much of a mood in general. It was almost like we were kind of zoning out and unfazed by the world, even though we really wanted those wings. That's the interpretation I got from like a lack of committal to a particular sort of like mood with the chords or the guitars or the drums or whatever. I do, again, nonetheless think that the sparkle of those synths added a bit of joy to the track that I don't think would have been there otherwise, but then the strummed acoustic guitars afterwards kind of brought them back down to kind of balance in everything in the equilibrium of the unknown, so to speak. But the studio recording, mixing and mastering was solid. I think it was commercial grade. It was really pretty how things were EQ'd in the mix, like the synths, the guitars, and then the bass and drums were a bit more subtle, but without being too much. There might have been a little bit of a resonance in the higher range. There were some of those cymbal hits being a little bit kind of like sharp, but like not too much. That kind of gives you just a bit more sort of edge, which you kind of appreciate. And I think that things were nicely leveled overall. There was dynamic range to the piece. Things are not the same loudness all the time, which I enjoy. You need to have variations in order for people to not kind of just become overloaded by it. Things were nice about in the stereo field with the guitars earlier on, kind of going back here, and the vocals being double tracked on the sides like really intensely. That was a really cool decision from panning perspective there. It was nice to allow that pumping so the bus compression and limiting was handled, and the vocals themselves as a final note. I think there were production decisions made with them, but they were never to like clean up the vocals or make them a certain way. There might have been reverb or something added, or like a little bit kind of like filtering with the EQ to kind of notch any frequencies, but otherwise it was just a raw take. But that's my review of this track from an act named Radiohead titled Let Down, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show them some love via their various social medias and Spotify page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as you need to help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I will catch you in the next SP Patrons video. Spiderhands out.